December 2014 to be specific, MISTRA held a conference wherein various experts and scholars contributed papers and gave presentations on this topic. We had a range of scholars, activists, decision makers who presented some thought-provoking ideas, and these were then collated into an essay in the form of a volume that was published in 2018. So this was just before the commission started. So now that the commission has finished its work, we thought it would be important to recall all those contributors to that volume of essays to reflect on the aftermath of the Zondo Commission, its findings, and the whole process. Now, the various contributors are here with us today, led by the co-editors, that is Professor Itumeleng Musala and Dr. Iraj Abedian. We've also invited other contributors, Ms. Nompumelelo Ranji, Mr. Ruel Koza, but we also have a respondent, which is Rifta Ajam. Now, today's event is supposed to be informed by the volume of essays. However, it does not necessarily mean that the contributors will be drawing on those chapters specifically. However, they will draw from some of the ideas and some of their own findings and insights to reflect on what is happening currently, especially in the aftermath of the submission of the final report. So the themes that we're going to be working with are around ethics, ethical leadership in particular, institutions, political parties. We will look into state capture itself. We would look at business ethics, but also we will look at state capture in the context of South Africa's economy. Leading us in this conversation is going to be Professor Itumeleng Musala, who was the editor of that volume of essays named Seeking the Ethical Foundations of the South African Nation. So, without wasting any further time, I'm going to be calling upon Professor Musala, who is actually the head of Secretariat of the Zondo Commission. So not only is he the co-editor of the volume of essays, but he was also quite involved with the Zondo Commission. He's also the former Director General of Arts and Culture and a former Vice Chancellor of the Technikon of Northwest. He is the Professor of Theology and a former president of the Azania People's Organization, otherwise known as AZAPO. He is also an ordained minister of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. Now, his book chapter, which is also, informed by the introduction and also contributions as the editors between himself and Dr. Iraj Abedian, was focused mainly on the crisis of morality, which was driven by self-interest. Now, I would like to hear from him in the aftermath of the commission what that input means in South Africa today. Over to you, Professor Itumeleng Musala.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good afternoon, colleagues and friends and fellow panelists. My goodness, we never could have known that shortly after the project that we were working on and the publication of the book that we worked on, and thanks for correcting that I was a co-editor with Dr. Abedian. I wasn't the sole editor of the book. We never ever could have guessed that so very shortly after the work that we did and the launch of the book that we launched through Mistra, who already got a sense of just how bad things were getting in the country, we never could have guessed that we would enter the 4.5 years of investigations that the president of the country proclaimed a commission for, and that we would be going through what we went through. I don't know how you feel, but I feel, I don't know. I mean, I've gone through ups and downs spiritually. I've wondered about whether it's the same country that I knew and the same country that I fought for, I struggled for. At the same time, I thought, no one else in the world is doing what we're doing. At least we are confronting it. Mistra has taken the lead in doing this. It was a very, very difficult time. Even as we said, I think we ourselves had a period of about 3 years of working on this project. And we had ideas and views. I mean, I've, like I say, it's been a roller coaster of some sorts for me the last 4.5 years of the commission. But I also now look back and say there are certain things we wanted to do as Mistra and as the team and the project. When we were working on what we worked in. I mean, I remember one of the things was that we would be able to attract people from all corners of our society, representing all clusters, possible clusters of people who would be concerned as part of the organizations they came from or as just individuals coming from various parts of our society. We would get together, and at the end we would develop what we called charters, sector charters, and that what we tried to do, the responses that we tried to put together in relation to what we were sensing as a crisis of morality, as I tried to do in the introduction of the book, would be taken back to the various communities, and that people would embark on a process, civil society, organizations of communities and of parties and of religious organizations, that people would go back to base, and that a struggle would arise throughout the country that would be driven and guided by the ideas that would have come out of the work that we were doing. We went as far as completing the project. We went as far as publishing the book. I'm not so sure. I certainly didn't take anything back to where I came from, except thinking about things, worrying about things, getting depressed about things. And the next thing that happened, I found myself in the commission. And I don't have to tell you what happened in the commission. It was just unbelievable. We had a sense that it was that bad. But I think we just truly did not know, did not have the opportunity to dig deep enough to find have. And now here we are. And so I think Mistra really ought to be congratulated and to be thanked for bringing us back together again, in the same sense as civil society organizations have erupted again, have begun to erupt again, and we here at the Commission that people are organizing themselves to do something about what we have gone through and seen in the space in which they are. And so I'm hoping that maybe this conversation might begin to share with us how people feel and what they think could be done. We obviously hope, speaking for the Commission, we obviously hope that the state, the government, the president, and all the organs of state in South Africa will start us off. I mean, I do know that the president has decided that he will, and has in fact probably done so already, decided to submit the report to Parliament, and Parliament is already working on a response as Parliament, In other words, the people that we have elected, the public representatives, the political public representatives that you and I voted for, are already looking at what is to be done. There are difficult implications all around. There are also difficult ways that with which everybody is going to be affected, because the same parliament that's going to be looking at it is also the same parliament that we had to bring to the commission to testify about where were they when these things were happening. How come they, particularly since what the commission did was work on the public sector and the organs of state, looking at the corruption that was happening there, because that's what began to depress the nation, began to make us all think about, is this the government that we elected? Are these the people who sacrificed as much as they actually did? They are the same people who are going to have to come back to us to say, from the side of, from point of view of the president, say to us what are they going to do. But we now know that we can't leave it to government. It's great that the government will be doing something, but we all now know that we were there, we saw, we listened, we heard, and we all can access the report and we can organize ourselves and try to help. So those are my opening remarks. Those are my feelings. I can tell you it's been big. It's not only been depressing, revealing, and all of those terms we can think about. I can tell you that it's also been one of the biggest thing. I don't know that anywhere else in the world, systematically, all in one place, all through one process, that any country in the world has been able to give the kind of focus to corruption that South Africa has done. And so I think we need to congratulate ourselves from that point of view, but we also need to get ourselves depressed by the fact that what we've collected on corruption and state capture and fraud in our country is the biggest collection of data on corruption that I know anybody can. I'm not saying that it's bigger than the corruption anywhere else in the world. I'm saying collected in one place. For those who can imagine what we mean, I had to be taught what this meant. This means the amount of data, evidence on corruption collected by the Commission over the last 4.5 years is estimated at a petabyte of data. Now, so those of you who are numbers people will know what a petabyte is. There are lots of estimates that people have given us. Some people have said if you were to cover Manhattan in the US with a blanket of rice, that'll give you an idea how big the data is we've collected. Other people have said to me that that is the equivalent of 3 times the size of Johannesburg. That is the data on corruption that has been collected. We have only been able to use 1% of that data. All of those 19 volumes that have been written by Chief Justice Zondo on corruption have only covered 1% of the data on corruption that has been collected. So there's the task, there's the challenge. I think only about my granddaughters at this point, that long after they become adults, we will still be trying to deal with that amount of corruption. I'll stop there, Chairperson, and let the other panelists maybe come in.
Thank you so much for setting the scene, Professor Musala. And it gives us a moment to reflect. And my biggest takeaway is your, reflections on its impact on your spirituality, your own spirituality, and of course, as someone who, who's an ordained minister. So that would be very important. But also wondering about the future as we are waiting for the president to take the final report to parliament. Now, the question that still remains is, can we really build a renewed ethical foundation for democracy in South Africa. To now respond to this question and also Professor Musala's insights there, I'm going to call upon one of the contributors, Nompumelelo Ranji. Nompumelelo is the founder and CEO of Critical Thinker, a public policy firm that is specializing in policy research, is also a former lecturer at the University of Pretoria and also a former columnist for the Sowetan. She is also a published author, and as mentioned, she contributed towards this volume of essays. And her focus really was more around, whether government, the ethical crisis that we see in government can be linked or tied to cadre deployment. Can it be tied to the issues that are happening within the ANC and the debates around deployment there? And also, what is the overall result when it comes to the workings and the mechanisms of state and implementation of policies therein? So, Nompumelelo, what is your take, and especially on the basis of your chapter?
Thank you so much, Xolelo, and thank you to Prophet Dumeling for setting the scene for us. I do think that his reflections on the personal impact of the state of our nation, and particularly the findings of the Zondo Commission, are actually quite important for us. I think each and every one of us cannot say we have been untouched by this. I mean, I was born in the 80s. Grew up in the 90s with a lot of optimism and hope, and to be facing some of the pressures that we're facing right now as young people, economic pressures, social pressures, and really questioning what prospects we actually have in this country for our futures and the future of our children. It is quite depressing, and it adds a lot to our anxiety and personal anxiety as an individual, but also then a societal anxiety, I suppose. And so going back to the point that Prof. Dumeling made about the saliency of this publication and the actual project itself, I think it's still quite an important project, this book, and the contributions made in it. Particularly because it dealt with, I think, some of the core issues that have been uncovered in the 4 years of investigations. And I think one of the things that did stand out is the question around the policy of cadre deployment that has been applied by the African National Congress, the governing party, for the last 28 years. And so it was, I think, important for us for the book and for the project itself to reflect on it. And I think it's important to remember that it's something again that was mentioned by Prof, that that this question of going back to asking ourselves, who have we elected into government? Did we know that we could not trust these people? We start asking questions about ourselves, about the commitment of the ANC as a movement to its own ideals, to the struggle against injustice and apartheid that it waged over so many decades, a struggle that has been fought over centuries as well, and a struggle against colonialism as well. So then we have to reflect a little bit and obviously try to be as historically accurate and say that the ideals and the intentions of the movement were noble, but of course it is said that the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And so we know that during the struggle against apartheid and to bring the system of this unjust system down, one of the goals was in fact to capture the state. And what did it look like? It was to get control of political power so as to transform society, so that it operated in the interests of the broader population and not just a narrow segment of the population, which at that point obviously was working in the interests of the white minority. And so the aim was to reconfigure the state so that its interests were now shaped by serving the broader interests of society. And so we have this, the concept of the National Democratic Revolution, which the ANC espouses, a national project that aims to transform South Africa into a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and united country. Now, the question, I guess, was one of modality. I mean, how do you achieve that? How do you transform the state? How do you make it truly representative and truly just? And how do you build a just society on the foundations of an unjust system? And those were some of the things that I reflected on in the chapter, and that those were the core issues that the ANC coming into government had to grapple with, and how to operationalize its ideal and its vision for society, considering itself not only as a political bastion or leader of society, but actually, bastion, but also a leader, just as a leader of society, morally as well, ethically as well. And so we see that the strategy then becomes to make the state demographically representative, to ensure that there's a political and ideological realignment of the state, so that it reflects these ideals of non-sexist and non-racial, united, democratic, just society, and repositioning and reorienting the state to serve the social and economic interests of the majority. And so we see the policy of cadre deployment then being used as the approach to do that, obviously infusing the public service with cadres from the movement, with the idea, obviously, of achieving this demographic transformation, but also of ensuring that you've got the ideology and the political vision of the party infused, into public institutions, and then also, obviously, trying to also ensure that you've got people working towards the interests of reshaping and repositioning society broadly. And one of the things that I highlight is that, obviously, the task of the Black majority government now was to ensure that it can now position the state to drive the agenda of redistribution of resources to uplift the Black majority, and the challenge was to lift millions of people out of poverty, create jobs, create a Black entrepreneurial class and a class of industrialists, to create a class of educated professionals as well, and so these are the things that that the ANC has attempted to do through this policy of cadre deployment. Now, the challenge of this and the weakness of the policy, obviously, is that how do you ensure that the cadres you deploy consistently maintain the vision and the mission of the movement without being swayed by selfish interests? And I think that's one of the things that the Zondo Commission highlights, because the state capture, as we now understand it, was this major repurposing of the state to serve narrow interests. Now, the taking over of the state by a few individuals and an elite group, and that repurpose the state in order to serve its own interests, in order to aggrandize themselves and make themselves beneficiaries of this transformation that was supposed to be more broadly distributed across society. Now, the challenge of cadre deployment as it has been applied, I suppose, is that how do you ensure that this policy is successful when it lacks a mechanism for enforcing discipline? enforcing organizational discipline and the discipline of the individual cadres themselves that have been infused into the state system. And this approach or this policy of cadre deployment largely relies mostly on the integrity of cadres. And if you're relying mainly on the integrity of cadres, the question is, how do you ensure that each individual cadre has their moral compass in check, and that in everything that they're doing, they're basing it on the ethical ideals of the struggle, that of working towards a just society. I think the second challenge is that of the context, the South African context, our socio-economic context of poverty, of deep inequality, and then you are giving obviously cadres and individual members of the party the authority, the power, access to resources, and the responsibility to disperse those resources in a just manner in the context of socioeconomic pressures and real constraints on livelihoods. I mean, the economy has not grown consistently and at a fast enough pace. The cost of living has just been increasing. We've experienced shocks, including obviously the global financial crisis, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that followed that, the inability of the economy to create jobs and to absorb labor, and of course deepening inequality. And so in the context of that, again, if the system itself just relies on the integrity, the personal integrity of cadres under these pressures, is how long can individuals really sustain this personal will of not misappropriating these funds. And so this mechanism of a check and a balance and of discipline that really has failed to exist, that has not really functioned well, even though the intentions were noble in terms of trying to transform, reposition, reorient the state, and infuse it with this new ideology of justice, of fairness, of equality, and building this society, this ideal society. It has failed in the context of these dynamics. And so we then see this issue of mushrooming and growing corruption. And I think that's something that I think the Zondo Commission investigations have highlighted, and it's a question that really needs to be revisited in terms of the relationship between this party and state. Of course, we know about this concept of the blurring of lines between party and state. I mean, the ANC is not the only political party across the world that uses cadre deployment. Even other political parties, even within the country, use cadre deployment, which is basically you want people who are aligned to your vision, aligned to what you're trying to achieve. The question is, how do you ensure the checks and balances, and how do you ensure that those people are consistently operating within the framework of the ethical framework that is provided for? And I think this is the shortcoming that is brought to bear by the events that that have been uncovered over the 4 years of investigations in the Zondo Commission. And so, is there a possibility of building a public administration that is based on strong ethical foundations, that is really committed to the ideals and the values, the constitutional values of constructing a just society and equal society? I think they are definitely there, but it's not. It shouldn't be taken in isolation. It's a systemic challenge that speaks to how do we actually transform society. How do we build an inclusive economy that includes the majority? How do we get more people earning a livelihood? How do we get more social inclusion as well, and deal with the disparities that we see across communities in our country, and how do we make sure that there are more opportunities available to individuals other than looking to the state as a site of accumulation, and then obviously restoring moral leadership, ethical leadership as well, across the board, not just in the state, not just in government, but across society, in the private sector, because this system and of state capture that has overtaken the state could not have happened without the collusion with the private sector. And also, how do we strengthen the role of civil society? Many South African civil society organizations, South African civil society in general, has championed and pioneered a just and fair society, an equal society, predating democracy and even post-democracy. And so how do we then bring that to bear in order to influence the workings of government and the workings of big business and corporations, and ensuring that that they are aligned in the way that in practice as well as in their principles, aligned to this ethical foundation that we want to build this country on. And I guess it's again going back and reflecting on who we are as a country, and whether or not our constitutional foundation and values are still a compass for us, and how to make sure that it's not just something that we speak about, it's not just rhetoric, but how do we turn that into mechanisms of accountability, mechanisms of ensuring that the public administration, the bureaucrats that are working in there, as well as the political principles that are above them and overseeing them, actually toe the line. And I think that's really the challenge. It's not that we don't have a framework for transparency and accountability. I think we have a challenge in terms of ensuring that there are consequences, ensuring that the arm of justice is actually working, but also ensuring that it's not just a matter of the legal conception of justice, but also social justice. How do we ensure social justice? And we need to stop giving lip service to that. We really need to start working towards narrowing the gap between the haves and the have-nots, narrowing the income inequality, the wealth inequality in our country, the inequality in terms of opportunities, reconstructing our education system, dealing with the fact that our unemployment is structural, and addressing that challenge, also dealing with the fact that there's still a number of barriers to access to multiple industries and sectors, for startups and for people who actually want to enter, those entrepreneurs, etc. So there are many things that we really need to address if we are going to really fully address this challenge of systematic and institutionalized corruption in the form of state capture. So I think I'll leave my remarks at that.
Thank you very much, Nompumelelo, for that very strong input there. And my takeaway from that is that also this cadre deployment is not something that's unique to the ANC. Even if we were to change political parties, you might still have, this idea of using the state as a site of accumulation. And the question is, what are the sanctioning mechanisms? But also, what is the role of civil society there, which is largely ignored. But also, Professor Musala, I think what was very key in his input was this idea of data accumulation or collection of data during the investigations. Is there potential for that data on corruption? Is there a way that this can be amplified? And if so, what are the sanctioning mechanisms? Will there be any consequences at all? Or will we see a situation where we revert back to a different kind of state capture? Now, going to stakeholders or sectors, or rather social partners that tend to be ignored when it comes to this conversation, we have invited a representative from Labour, and this is in the form of Rifda Ajan, who is actually the General Secretary of FEDUSA, but also the member of the Human Resources Development Council of South Africa, and also a board member at the CCMA. Now, as I've indicated, we're inviting Labour because this is a sector that's usually ignored when it comes to, concerns raised, regarding the process of investigation, the commission itself, and all these issues that have been unpacked by both the Prof and Nompumelelo. She did not contribute to the book per se, but we felt that it would be important to get some reflections or responses to these ideas that have been, presented or tabled during this webinar. Now, over to you, Rifda, with your reflections from the vantage point of Labour. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the opportunity, and good afternoon once again to all the esteemed panelists and all the participants on the platform. I want to start off from the perspective that I don't think we should be making the error in saying that we are not necessarily heard as Labour, or our voices are not necessarily finding expression in the bigger narrative when we look at the issues regarding state capture and corruption. As Labour, our voices are amplified at the highest echelons. We have been able to not only engage, not only threaten, but ensure that where the levels of corruption have manifested themselves within the organs where we are represented and where we serve our members, that it is well known and that it is well documented. So I'm going to start from the perspective of the paper and the specific emphasis that Prof. Itumeleng describes as a moral crisis. And when you take a look at that at the very title, it says it seeks the ethical foundations. And when we look at the question in retrospect, we have to ask the question, what exactly are we searching for? But ultimately, the question remains. And I come back to the very emphasis that you place on, is Labour playing a great role? Is Labour's voice muffled? Where do we find ourselves in the greater paradigm of what we are looking for? Because ultimately, when we deal with the matter from a perspective of Labour, we look at the injustices that were dealt to members of the working class when it came to this curse of corruption, especially during the time of COVID. There was PPE corruption at the highest levels. We saw that when our members, when workers who were eroded of their livelihoods, when their income and their security were diminished, and COVIDers attempted to be a lifeline towards them, equally so, they were robbed of the very funds to a particular fund, the UIF, that was supposed to assist them during these times of despair. So I come back to the question in terms of seeking ethical foundations and whether or not our voices as Labour is loud enough and how we take this to the next level. So when we gather here today on this platform, I want to ask the question, as good people, attempting to find a solution and attempting to redirect the morals and the values that have been ingrained in our psyches as children. And let us not forget the same morals and values that have been ingrained in those who have been found wanting. Why do we gather here today? And what are we doing to stop the rot that has manifested itself in society? It is not rocket science that there is a difference between what is morally right and what is morally wrong. So the crisis that we look towards, the societal one, especially from a point of workers, the question remains not that whether or not our voices as labor are being ignored. The question is, why do we as a society, and I'm looking at the broader society, not confined to labor, but as the previous speaker had very well articulated, that organized communities came together at a time when they needed to raise their voices. Why do we therefore fear challenging the status quo when those closest to us have suffered and have been afflicted by this curse of corruption and state capture? It is painful to know and to be unable to do anything when your members have been without income. And I speak specifically about our members now in the state-owned enterprises who have been ravaged by these injustices of corruption. How do you bear and look at them when after 2.5 years, they have still not received an income? The pain and the desperation could have been avoided if good people had done just something to stop everything they knew that was absolutely wrong. So we are engaging and our voices are as loud as possible. And we are emphasizing the fact that within the society that we are looking towards, one that we are envisioning, one that we are aspiring towards, words such as moral regeneration must be brought about. We need to look at ethical ambassadors across the divide, not just within the public space where our members have been affected, but equally so within the private sector, because you speak about corruption, but you shouldn't be excluding collusion. The discipline that we speak about, but more specifically so, the social justice that needs to prevail. And when we look at the very question in terms of labor, we yearn for meritocracy. And we ask whether blind loyalty should still be reconsidered and when exactly consequence management will find itself within the space that we are working towards. So from a perspective of labor, I shudder and I shake. And the only words that come to mind in the context of this entire discussion is one of kleptocracy and thievocracy. We shouldn't mince our words and we shouldn't be diluting it in any such way. And we should be standing firm and not wait for another 4.5 years for our members to lose their jobs, for our members to have to suffer the indignity of having their incomes taken away from them. And as Judge Zondo had said, this is no joke. This is deadly. This is serious. It is a disgrace and a bloodstain on your party when he handed over those voluminous reports. We cannot be waiting for another 4 years. We cannot be waiting. And as Labour, we will continue to raise our voices. And we ask the question whether or not another social compact will be a potential solution when you look at the process of inclusivity. So today, as FEDUSA, we will declare all those that have been implicated by raising our voices as enemies of the working class when they stole during a time when there was absolute desperation. We will be declaring those that have been implicated as enemies of the people for stealing from them when they were left destitute. We should not, as good people on this platform, as ambassadors, as those looking towards a sense of social justice, justice and redirecting the fabric of society stay silent at a time when our voices should be raised, not only as Labour, but as civil society overall in all its glory.
Thank you very much, Rifta, for those very strong points that you are making there. I see we still have about 65 people in attendance, and I think you'll be very happy to know that now we've got about an hour or so of a Q&A session where we get to engage with these questions and also maybe with the various contributions that were made here. Rifta has just made a strong point there on, ethical ambassadors. How do we become ethical ambassadors? But I think to tie it back to Professor Musala's point about our children and our grandchildren, can we become worthy ancestors? And this is now ourselves moving away from the golden triangle of labor, business, and government. But what about ourselves as citizens? How do we become worthy ancestors? How do we become ethical ambassadors? I see there's already a question here from Simpiwe Malgas. Simpiwe is asking if the ANC cadre deployment is still necessary. And I'd like attendees to also raise their hands to indicate if they'd like to contribute or ask questions or, just make comments. If they can please do so by raising their hands, and I'll be monitoring it along with the colleagues on the technical side. If you're feeling a bit shy, you can also still put your questions on the Q&A. We'll also try to answer them live. So maybe I'll take Simpiwe's question as the first one. And now I'm trying to see if there's any hands from, the audience back at home. There's, okay, I see former SG, Dr. Padili Hotla has raised his hand. Over to you, former SG.
Thank you very much, I think the Inflammatory released its barometer yesterday showing the dismal situation we are in. I'm happy that Tower made a presentation and asked the right question. What kind of ancestors do we wish to be? And I need to really pose a question which we probably need to confront. When we became DGs, we were confronted with a situation of outsourcing of services like cleaning, bodyguards, security, and drivers. And that, either way, within your structure of personnel, made you confront the reality of what is happening beyond the mandate of, say, a person like who was looking after education, looking after health, or me looking after numbers. But there was this reality of drivers, cleaners, and security, which we accepted that those jobs should be outsourced. The question was, to whom did we outsource those? And we therefore alienated the problem and outsourced the problem so that we can't see it in our face. And I think if we have to reset, we need to deal with this outsourcing thing. Because as a top civil servant and committed to transform, you had to confront practically this question every day in your life, in the office. And instead we outsourced it. I resisted it and refused it in my department. I did it when we went to a new building and that was in 2015. But all the time I said, no, this business of circling cleaners, of course I lost it also with cleaners, with drivers and security. I managed to secure it. But I really think that the very act of outsourcing, what we had to experience every day, meant that we are not serious about transformation. Or rather, even if we are serious, we didn't demonstrate it in the very environment we worked. It's not a question, it's a statement, and I think it's a serious indictment, and we need to sort it out going forward.
Thank you for that, Dr. Lihotla. Next, I have TK Poe, who's going to make his inputs or provide insights or ask questions. I have not forgotten the ones that are on the Q&A. I will remind the panelists to respond to those. Over to you, TK.
All right. No, thank you so much. Thanks for this forum. Two quick ones. I think the first one is, why were we really surprised at what was happening at Zondo? I say this in the context, if we've worked in local government pre-Zondo, this was actually quite the norm. And I think maybe, if I had to maybe be a bit, maybe not callous in how I put it, maybe the higher echelon people were not really aware what's happening in South Africa. Because as I said, pre-90s, this was the case. I mean, the arms deal should have given us an insight. How the ANC operated in liberation in terms of how they managed their funds should have given us an insight as to what is coming. So I guess maybe my first question is, why the surprise? This is really quite the logical conclusion to how the governing party pre-1994 operated, how it operated in local and provincial government. That's my first point. And secondly, look, the issue of cadre deployment, maybe if we had to just contextualize it, because I think sometimes from a legal perspective, and I don't think the current Chief Justice did it justice, even the ANC doesn't do it justice. Not everybody is a cadre. There's a reason why the Chinese make a separation between a cadre and a comrade. So while I get the understanding of saying, listen, people being deployed, again, it's an issue of why the surprise. A lot of the people being deployed do not even qualify to be cadres. A cadre is someone who, they're known. I think O.R. Tambo used to say, you know them by their movement, you know them by the way they are. So is the issue not so much cadre deployment, as rather it's the inefficiencies within how the ANC identifies and understands to build a skills base? Because if one had to ask, where is the ANC skills base? Where's the ANC's policy trust? I know the head of MISTRA has always been cited, and I think correctly so, as the head, as one of those policy gurus. But what's below him? It's actually quite empty. So should we really, again, be surprised? You only have to read the ANC's current policy document to see that there is no thinking right now. So just that issue of, should we, I get that we need to curb the enthusiasm of getting the wrong people into government from any governing party, but should we also not take care to really focus on what, and have a clear theoretical understanding of what is a cadre? Yeah, so those are just my two questions.
Thank you so much. I want to take a fifth one, or we can go back to the panel. I don't see any hands, but I just wanted to remind colleagues, I'm not sure if the panelists can see the questions. In addition to Dr. Lihotla and TK, there was some Piwe asking whether this cadre deployment is necessary, and it's still necessary. And I think it links nicely with TK's input there on cadre deployment, but most importantly, why we're all acting so surprised. And then I've got Nania, who's asking about, the development of a social compact, asking whether there is hope in to develop a new social compact. And then I've got quite a lengthy input from Jackie Mahoba, but I think Jackie must come on, but maybe I'd like to hand over to the panelists so that they respond, maybe starting with Professor Mosalo, then moving over to Nompumelelo. And Rifta, if you'd like to come in also, you may, but I'd like to have the panelists respond in that manner. And then I'll come back to Jackie, whom I think I'd love to ask to actually speak to the points that they're making there. Thank you.
Program Director, are you expecting
Yes,
me to respond?
Prof, yes, Prof, and then maybe on the basis of the inputs that have been made by Dr. Lihotla, TK, and also the questions around cadre deployment and whether there is a hope for a new compact.
Okay, Sure, I wish I could leave it to Dr. Ibedian, who is the co-author of the co-editor of the articles in the book that we worked on. I'm not sure whether he's still going to speak or not.
Or maybe, Prof,
But
to make it easy, let
yeah,
me direct, there's one that's directed at you specifically. Now, that is Jackie's question that I was going to leave out for the next round, where Jackie is saying, Dr. Musala, was there a point in our evolution of democracy that we ever reached a pinnacle of ethical practice in all our societal affairs? If yes, and how it came that we lost it, especially around the period covered by the state capture inquiry. So is there a moment where we can say we were at our
okay,
pinnacle
all right.
of morality or ethics?
Yeah, well, pinnacle is too high a bar, Um, but but what I can say is that the South African struggle for liberation reflected some of the highest values, moral values that I have come across in my life. Let me put it that way, first of all. But secondly, I have traveled the world, and to the extent that there are individuals who are highly moral in other parts of the world, yes, we equaled individuals, but I haven't come across, maybe with the exception of the struggle for national liberation in Ireland and the struggle of the Palestinians and the Zimbabwean struggle in the heydays of that struggle. But the South African struggle had a character of its own, and predominantly it was
I think I've lost the prof. Am I the only one?
Yeah, we've lost his
Yeah,
connection.
we can't hear him.
We can't hear him. Okay, then maybe Nompumelelo, if you can just.
call it
Oh,
freedom.
yes, he's back.
When we
Prof, we had lost
sorry,
you there for a moment, I think for a minute
oh,
or
okay,
two. So if you can just
all
maybe
right,
repeat what
yes,
the last
yes,
two
yes.
sentences.
Yeah, no, I can only say that when we started, it was quite clear that this was a society starting on a very high moral note, and that this is a society that was for a while not going to be able to lose it. And hence it's too soon. I mean, it's not untrue that societies change, that countries change. From, if I could use just the biblical thing, with apologies to colleagues of other faiths, when the children of Israel landed in a destiny that defined the freedom they were yearning for, they had hardly landed, and things changed around. And so it's not like it's never happened in the world ever. But I must tell you, as someone who was involved in the struggle, who was in the forefront of a national liberty, that I could never have imagined. It was just not possible. So we did reach our pinnacle, but our pinnacle didn't last us long. The question is why? On the issue of cadre deployment, I really don't want to get into it because it's part of the content of the commission report, and at this time we're allowing the commission report to speak for itself. But I think a lot of us have thought, if I could just make a passing remark on it, we've wondered about the constitutionality of any party, and I don't want to talk about the ANC because I suspect that all other political parties across the board may be harboring the same kind of jealousy of wanting to be themselves who does this for their comrades and their cadres. But actually, I think it is unconstitutional. And I'm not a lawyer. I think that when you're dealing with the public sector is not yours. No party owns the public sector. And you can't bring your own party members to come and promote the policies of a party. The public sector is a national space. It is ruled only by the national constitution. So I think that whether it is under the ANC or under ZAPO or under the PC, the DA or anybody else, I would say that cadre deployment, we should be talking about national deployment. We should be talking about bringing in the sons and daughters of our country. We should be bringing in professionals, irrespective of party political alignment. I think it has to be fundamentally wrong. But I'm speaking for myself on that matter.
Thank you so much, Prof. Nompumelelo, would you like to come in there? No, Prof did not want to be speaking specifically to the ANC cadre deployment, but I mean, this is the ruling party, and I'm sure you can speak directly to that.
Look, I think I want to maybe align myself with what the comment made by TK about this having not to be a surprise. You know, the things we are seeing, I think, should not catch us by surprise, including what was uncovered in the Zondo Commission. It is true. I think many of the issues that we are trying to unpack are actually systemic issues. They're embedded in the structure and the nature of the South African state itself and how it functions. And even the question that Prof. now Dumelang was raising about the constitutionality of cadre to deployment and how it is that people are actually brought into positions, whether or not they are, cadres in the true sense of the word. I think it's about processes, it's about systems, but of course, these processes and systems are run by people. So really, I do agree with the point that's been made that it should not catch us by surprise, because we can't be ahistorical about these things. You actually have to go and see the praxis, the way things actually work on the ground in local government, in provincial government, in institutions, in interacting with party members, etc. But the question is, okay, so how do we fix those problems? How does the ANC then address the fact that the people that it's calling cadres and deploying into particular strategic positions are not even worthy of being placed there? How does the organization, the institution itself, the movement itself address itself to that? And we've seen over the last 2 decades that I don't think that the ANC itself as an organization is winning that battle. It's almost like it's a monster that has overrun even the party itself, and they can't contain this challenge. There are problems of discipline. There are problems of ethics within the movement and the party itself. There are problems of leadership and ethical leaders within the movement. So if the party itself and the movement itself is struggling with those issues, and the same party is then in charge of deploying people into the state to run the state in an ethical manner, we can't be surprised that we are seeing the challenges that we are seeing within the state. And so the question around is cadre deployment still necessary? Do we need it? I think we need to go back to the point that Prophet Dumelang is making. about, the public sector being a national sector. But how do we practically do that? How do we practically ensure that we don't have this blurring of the lines between party and state? It's entrenched now, it's systemic, and it's structural. So how we need to dismantle that. And we need to look at the ways. I'm not gonna sit here and claim to be the paragon of how we do that. I think there are many people working on this question. But I think it's first and foremost, it is important to be clear and identify that it's not just a matter of individuals. It's the matter of how things work. It's how the state functions. It's how the state is structured, and we need to begin to address that. Did we truly achieve the transformation of the state post-apartheid, or did we just build this democratic state on top of this already problematic system that existed before, and what measures can be taken to dismantle it? And I think another point that is important, back to the point around labor and civil society, and the role of labor and civil society or civil society broadly in this question, is civil society, citizens, we are the ones most affected by what is going on. We are the victims, the greatest victims of state capture and what has been unraveled in the State Capture Commission. And so again, just as it was in the past and during the struggle, again, it will rely on us again as citizens and civil society to call for something better. It is our responsibility also, and our opportunity to say this is not working, and we need to dismantle what is not working and replace it with something else, or this is how we need to reform and to tweak. We can't take a passive position on this. So I think it does require some level of a coming together of like-minded people, particularly in civil society, and we begin to try and influence the power brokers in government and in the private sector towards a consensus that leads us to a more ethical and moral society. I don't think we can leave it to the politicians, and I don't think we can leave it to the leaders of corporate and big business who are taking right now, the greatest initiative and lead when it comes to social compacting processes. I think it has to be something that we make a real priority as civil society, and a real priority as citizens, to actually stand up against the rot. And see how it is that we can begin to change the trajectory of our nation.
Thank you so much, Nompumelelo. Rifta, you also mentioned social compacts and potential. You asked the question, will a social compact be a solution? And we have Nania in the Q&A function who's also asking if there is hope. Really, you spoke to the efforts, by labor and other social partners during COVID. So, what are your lessons from that? Can you respond to Nania's question on whether there is hope to ever develop a new compact?
Thank you very much for the question, first and foremostly. And I believe it's a very good question that we need to be able to respond to effectively, to be able to draw on where we are and where exactly it is that we are hoping to go to. So when we look at a social compact, it is not necessarily a new concept. There have been many lessons drawn on social compacting, for example, in countries such as Ireland, such as Australia. And in many instances, the fundamental principles of inclusivity have always been one that has been one of the foundations of the compact. But at the same time, the notion of inclusivity should be built on the relations of trust. And currently, within the context of South Africa, the trust relations have been broken down. So when we look at some of the ideals of the very social compact and what exactly it is that we are looking for, it is not only based on inclusivity, but equally so the notion of creating jobs, the notion of creating an enabling environment for businesses to be able to operate effectively. And at the same time, there should be a notion of accountability. In the context of this discussion, there's a lack of accountability. And at the same time, as we move towards many elements of a compact, currently, we take a look at the State of the Nation address delivered in February 2022. Government has given itself 100 days to be able to work on many of the elements that it has aspired to, that it has attempted to commit to. But when we look at what it is that we want to do, we need to say, are we ready? Do we have the political will? Because many of the aspects that I have alluded to, such as trust, has been broken down in many instances. And I speak from a perspective of what has happened during the process of negotiations, in particular during 2018, when a multi-term resolution was signed, and government was one of the first players to signal to the public there is confidence, there will be service delivery, we are able to deliver on a mandate. Yet 2 years down the line, as a result of the very cancer that we are dealing with now, corruption, the funds had disappeared. I asked myself, where to? Why do we keep on grappling and shooting ourselves in the foot when we are able to build a competent and a capable state if only we focus on the areas of meritocracy? And it touches on some of the other questions that have equally been posed in the chat facility. But when we look at the process of deployment, we equally have to go just a little bit back and ask ourselves, during that very process of this transition to democracy, when cadres were thrown into the deep end and expected to swim, were they capacitated enough? Were they able to do what was required of them with the levels of competence coming from the backgrounds that they did? So we still have a lot to do, but there is many mountains that we still have to cross, considering the challenges that we are being hamstrung by now, the structural impediments that we look towards, and how we build a process of inclusivity when government shows its hand, but is unfortunately not able to deliver. There have been many social compacts in South Africa that have been concluded, whether it is by virtue of NEDLAC or other platforms, just going back a few years ago. And we have one social compact now, which is the economic recovery and reconstruction policy. We've had the social accords. We've had the localization agenda that we have been begging South Africans to commit to. One of the low-hanging fruits that we will be able to plow back to our very own society, where we will be able to advance skills development, where we will be able to look at skills transfer, but equally so reskilling and upskilling. And unfortunately, as we continue to look at an agenda of outsourcing and where those public-private partnerships are not going to bring about meaningful engagements, then the social compacts are not necessarily going to be working. So at this juncture, we have the ability. But when we go back just a few years, when we take a look at the Job Summit of 2018, How do we be able to look at the commitments that were made when at the same time retrenchments had followed that particular process and it continued unabated, even though there was a moratorium? So social compacting requires an unwavering commitment by all. We are speaking about inclusivity, but at the same time, we need to be able to drive this process with all on board, looking at an unconditional commitment. There are brilliant policies in place, but lack of implementation continues to put us on a back foot. When we take a look at the commitments that are required from many of us, there will most certainly be questions, in particular from Labour, with regards to not just investments, but in terms of being able to find those state-owned enterprises once again that were in a very good space, but have been eroded as a result of what we are dealing with today. So we are facing a brain drain. All those skilled personnel are being absorbed at a massive pace by those up north. How are we going to remedy and reconstruct those compacts without the fundamentals of trust, without the fundamentals of accountability? So if we are not going to look at unconditional commitment, we find ourselves stuck. But a compact is possible if we have commitment from all on board.
Thank you so much, Rifda, for that response. I know that Dr. Iraj Abedian is supposed to be doing the closing remarks, but I think this could be a good moment for him to come in, especially when it comes to reflections on, what is happening, especially regarding business in light of a social compact. He was the co-editor alongside Professor Musalo, that is co-editor of the volume of essays. He's also the founder and chief executive at Pan-African Investments and Research Services. He's a good friend of Mistra's, working on various projects with Mistra, but before entering this world of business, he was at the University of Cape Town. And his chapter is really on the global ethical crisis, but also at the same time looking at the role of the private sector in this crisis. Professor Abedian, would you like to come in there? We still will have you bring everything together in the end, but there's been quite a few questions that may require your input. And I see Professor Musalo is busy fielding some of the questions on the chat function there. Over to you, Iraj.
Thank you very much, and greetings to all colleagues on the panel, as well as our colleagues in the chat room or in the webinar. I'm just starting my video. Yeah, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here with you this afternoon. And I'm absolutely awestruck as my colleague, Prof. Masala, said that what we were worrying about in 2015 came out to be a tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Now, armed with what we know, it is quite clear that that the Zondo Commission process, from what we have seen, and I did take note of the fact that we seem to have only been exposed to 1% of it, but it is quite clear that corruption, abuse, and decay in ethics during this period was not just confined to government. It was not about and facilitated by the incompetent and corrupt so-called cadres. I find the whole term an oxymoron. If anybody says, I can only trust these cadres to come and destroy the legacy of the ANC, legacy of what we aspire for, put more misery and poverty and pain on the nation, then for me, that's not a cadre. That's the enemy. That's the enemy of whoever, whatever we aspire to. So I think that oxymoron has to be dealt with. And the problem is that has a spilled over to the private sector. We know that the type of daylight robbery at the level that was done over the decade and more could not be done by cadres alone. Cadres were just way too incompetent to steal that much in that way. They needed business, local business and global business. And the evidence clearly is there now that both local corporates as well as international corporations got involved in all sectors, from banking to law, from advisory to electricity generation, from railways to investment bankers. So the problem is much bigger than the mere incompetence of the deployed cadres. The problem now, as I understand it, and based on what colleagues have shared, is a cancerous systemic degeneration of not only ethics, but also the institutions that are meant to conduct governance, deliver to the nation at all levels, be it at the level of service delivery or be it at the level of strategic positioning of the nation for its next 20, 30, 40 years. So at whatever level I look at it, colleagues, we have a big problem that we cannot minimize to ANC anymore. ANC may have caused it, but South Africa now has to correct it, has to deal with it. The Zondo Commission has shown that the so-called ANC leaders betrayed their own ideals, betrayed their own comrades, and betrayed the history for which they fought. But that's history. That we cannot wish for a better past, but we have to work together to make the future a better future, a much more ethical future. Now, I do not want to abuse my time, Chair, but I would like to highlight the fact that if we were going to focus on the private sector alone, in various sectors of it, we would find different types of captures. For example, one of the biggest ones for me is, which I've written about it, and it is in public arena, is the capture of national savings resources in the hands of the private sector with the support of legislation. Now, that is a very unethical basis for whatever we want to achieve. So my submission is to the colleagues here and to the forums that we are, that let's reboot, let's rearm ourselves for dealing with not just a partial way, because if we focus on cadre deployment, we run the risk of not dealing with other equally important and consequential unethical elements of our socio-political system, economic and financial system. So that's my submission, Chair, and I am both depressed as my colleague, Prof. Musale is, but as well as other colleagues, but at the same time, I am so angry that I would like to channel that anger, and I believe my anger is not just confined to myself. Wherever I go these days, whoever I interact with, Zondo Commission proceedings have made South Africa very, very, very angry. Angry against the like of Marcus Justus, who's destroyed billions upon billions, as well as all those political as well as cadres who have equally destroyed possibly a couple of 100 billion rands of our resources, but more than rands and dollars, they have put at risk the future of our children and our grandchildren. That, to me, is worthy enough a cause to say, let's join forces, focus on the big issue, The big issue for me is the degeneration, a total collapse of the moral basis of our society, and the private sector operates on that format alongside government. And unless we do it openly and expeditiously, we're going only one way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abedian, for that submission there. I noted some questions here, and there's now seems to be more questions on the chat function, and I know one or two has indicated that they would rather, vocalize it. And at times, when it's responded to, maybe you'd find that it's not responded to sufficiently, or you're not happy with the response. So I will name all the contributors on the chat function, and if they can raise their hands, if they still want to come in again, even though there was an attempt by Professor Musalo to respond. I have Bara or Bakwa, I'm not sure, please correct me if I'm wrong. And I have Wandile, Naweni, then there's Tabani, then there's Mandisa, and Asimpiwe. If you can raise your hands if you still want to come in, and then we'll do that. And where your hand is not raised, then it will show me that you are happy with the response. But Mandisa, I don't think you were responded to, so maybe it would be prudent if you could maybe just come in there. I'm concerned that most of the contributions have been really mostly on the chat function. Okay, I see Bara is the first one. Please go and please correct me if I got your name wrong.
Actually, my name is Mudimwa Wawa, but
Bara. Okay.
Bara, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Kanyan, thank you very much. I think I've been enjoying this, engagement. I think these are debates that we engage to bring the society to where we can derive comfort that we are grappling with this pandemic. I call it a pandemic, which has been confronting us for ages. But my question is more on the civil society, more particularly with the emergence of what you call the media fraternity. And I think we need to appreciate that the media fraternity has done a lot of exposures which of this road, which has been followed through by further probes with the Zondo Commission, but also the whistleblowers who have been actively involved in these spaces. But I'm just more concerned that it looks like we don't have a conducive or a favorable environment where the whistle can be blown with the guarantees of protections. We also know witnesses, sometimes they are fearing extortions, and at the same time, there are those who are the victims of circumstances and they are fearing their lives. So I'm just checking what possible ways or guarantees of these interventions so that we are in a free society. I know we have some legislations but that protects the whistleblowers, but they are just there, but not having those guarantees. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Bara. Wandile, Tabani, and Mandisa, would you still like to come in, or you happy? I know Mandisa's question was not responded to, so maybe Mandisa should come in there.
We have Mashite.
Yeah,
Mashite.
hello.
Yes,
Hello.
please go ahead, Mashite.
Oh, dumelang le kae? Hello.
Yes, Dumela.
Ke a leboga le kae sanibonani nda abusheni molweni merag. My name is Mashite. I just want to reflect on what was presented by that lady on labor issues, and also reflect on the presentation by the other lady on cadre deployment. With regard to labor issues, victim of failed COVID-19 UIF claims. Their systems failed us dismally in my village. I was trying to help them to claim their UIF. Even to date, they don't appear on the systems. So generally, our people have been killed by that poor 4IR or systems used by labor. And I concur with the view that labor has been dealt with, and those people have isolated themselves and now identify them as enemies. And secondly, I want to, but not enemy, things that they have been unjust to the masses of our people, particularly in my village where I come from, and other villages and towns, about integrity. That when the deployment of cadres matter was brought to the ANC, the issue was on integrity. But you ask yourself, where was integrity? Because if you are a man of integrity, you'll always, man and woman of integrity, you'll always remember that whatever you do, people must attach value. So over the years, there was no value. I mean, you know how NASFAS has been failing our students. You know how quite a number of things which I cannot make. And we know the beneficiaries of these things. It's just that we are protecting minority interest here. And my view is that we should not give up on building this country. We should not give up because this government is led by the ANC, and the ANC conceived in 1912. So no one is bigger squatter camps, including in the suburbs. So I'm eager that such an engagement such as this from Mistra should continue and involve the young people, because if you look in parliaments, legislatures, councils, old people whom they have played their parts, and they are closing doors for us as young people to contribute, and build this nation. That is my comment. I thank you very much for the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mashite Mokali there, followed by Mandi Safakela.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I've been struggling with I think it's from my side. I've just written that comment because, since the Zondo Commission said and one listened to what was going on, like many South Africans, one has been grappling with moving from being angry, disappointed, not sure what to do. But I also want to emphasize the point that really to work for the public service now is going to be an effort. Because I think if you're not corrupt, you're still going to be targeted. And I also think, or rather I feel for people who don't understand the government processes, because it takes long to train public servants. I'm speaking as a former public servant, and I know how long it took for all of us to actually understand the processes. So when you join corrupt organization, there's nobody actually who's willing to train you and make you understand the do's and don'ts. And for me, that's the sad part that keeps on worrying me, because I don't see any effort from the side of the state to actually undo this damage. We're just continuing as if nothing has happened. If maybe we were firm, the PPE corruption would not have happened. So the PPE corruption just said to some of us, this is it. It's just gonna be like this. I want people to imagine joining a department, you are there up there trying to do right for your country. And you have people at the lower level of the organization who are just doing wrong and will compromise you. And then we have the Auditor General invoking the public, their act, and judging you to actually respond to things that you may not necessarily have done, but you just link with people who are actually very committed, to do wrong. I'm saying this, against a very firm background, because I was in public works and I left. watching the corruption unfolding, I mean, after joining government, since Mandela was president, was the last straw for me. And I said to myself, you know what? All of us were brought up by our parents to be good citizens. And this is not what we went, our people struggled for. And it was actually getting worse. So the public service has lost a lot of experienced people. It's not only ESCOM. I hear this noise about ESCOM and SARS, but the public service has lost a lot of experienced people who it can be brought in or brought back just for a mere 5 years to assist to rebuild the public service. The way things are now, people are still dealing with things that were agreed upon in 2012 or 2013. You can take any meeting minutes and read for yourself or any policy positions. We just on a reverse gear. And most of the things that are actually repackaged as new, some of them were done or agreed upon when even Mbeki was president. So what does that show us as a country if we want to go forward and build an ethical society? We need to begin to review and bring back people that we know are ethical to assist to build the state, but also build a public service, because without capacity and capability in the public service, we will not be able to achieve this South Africa that we all yearn for and we all want to rebuild. I just thought, let me share those comments, because I listened very carefully to the introduction by Professor Musala and I couldn't agree more. But lastly, I want Dr. Iraj to just expand a bit during his closing remarks about the national savings matter that he alluded to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those, very sad but useful insights, Mandisa, especially, the brain drain that now is being experienced by, the public sector, wherein nobody is interested in working there anymore, or those such as yourself who have since left. I had asked some of the colleagues who've written comments, but some of them have been answered to if they're interested in coming in. And if not, I would like to maybe go back to the panel for one last round so that they can respond to issues raised by Bara on protection of whistleblowers. There's also Mashita, who spoke about integrity, issues of integrity, and also this whole idea of protection of the minority. And then lastly, Mandisa's input on the experience working within public service. I'll allow Simpiwe to come in. I had seen Simpiwe's input on patriotism. Do you want to come in, Simpiwe? And then we'll go back to the panel. Is Simpiwe still with us? Okay. If not, then maybe I should do it the other way around, starting with Iraj. I know you're going to finish so that you're not speaking after speaking. Maybe starting with you and then going backwards on the panel, just final responses or reflections on the basis of the questions and input by our participants.
Do you want me to respond, Kolile?
Yes, please, Iraj.
With respect to the question that was asked about the national savings capture, is the fact that at the moment all your savings, my savings, the pension savings of working class particularly are locked into processes over which there is very little effective governance. If you look at the rate of returns that have been secured for workers, is really unacceptable. The level of oversight that they have is almost non-existent, and what is there is notional. So in effect, the national savings are kept in a very small boys club of a couple of institutions, who a handful of institutions, who are not putting it into the national development and growth and job creation, and they don't know how, because that is not their forte. So I'm very concerned that when you have national savings, which every month is deducted from my salary and every worker's salary, I have no control over where it goes. People cut and paste it for their own benefits. And you've seen the billions upon billions that disappear or gets squandered on projects. You see when they put it into so-called good use. For example, they put 10 billion rand of the pension funds of the public sector unions, that are the nurses, teachers, police staff, and so on and so forth, into the land bank. That also disappears and nobody accounts for it. Now, in the private sector is the same. We've seen a Steinhoff 180 billion disappear. This is a capture of a different type, and we need to put it on the agenda. We cannot deal with some of the horrific issues of unemployment and poverty until we get that absolutely critical fundamental economic variable into a transparent and effective oversight and control. That's what I mean. But if you're interested, I can even share with you a copy of the paper that I addressed to the very institutions that I'm challenging. So it's not as if I'm talking behind their back. I wrote it and delivered it to their national conference. So yeah, that's what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Nompumelelo, would you like to come in on this idea of, the lack of remorse? Instead, cadres are fighting back, and that was raised by Mandisa as well. And I saw Mashita is also building on that and specifically quoting our executive director, Mr. Jonah Chitenze, on him saying beneficiaries of state capture will not give up without a fight. So he's asking there if this is true, and how do we deal with this, where there's this lack of remorse?
Yeah, I think just maybe, because this will be my closing remarks as well, is basically to try and tie these questions up with that as well. I think based on the discussions today and some of the points that Dr. Iraj raised a bit earlier, we can't be ahistorical once again. There is a continuity between the collusion between the economic elite and political elite when we look from the apartheid period to democracy, to contemporary South Africa. And Dr. Raj made the point that state capture at this scale could not have been possible, without collusion and assistance and enabling from the private sector, and not just domestically, but also multinational and global. So, and I think what is behind this continuity is an important question. And I think it goes back to the point about the fight back. Is that the thing is, it's unlikely those who have conducted this large-scale capture of the state and repurposing of the state believe that it's unlikely that they're going to be brought to book. They believe it's unlikely that there are going to be consequences because they got away with it before. Corporate South Africa has gotten away with the large-scale exploitation of a large part of South African society for decades and centuries, and were never brought to book. An interesting and an important contribution to that argument is a book by Professor Sampieter Blanche, A History of Inequality from 1652 to 2002, where even as he reflects on, for instance, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the failures thereof, one of the failures was that of holding corporate South Africa to account for its contribution to sustaining the system of apartheid. And I think that's where we really need to go back and trace. When I talk about the fact that this is not just an issue of individuals, this is systemic. And so when you have, public servants such as Mandisa, who just spoke now, who speak about how it is that they could no longer contend with staying in the public system, being good people, because we're not arguing that there are no ethical people in the public service. We're not arguing that there are no good people, there are no good people being deployed. But unfortunately, as an individual, it's very difficult to push against a system, and a system that many others have bought into. And so that's why it really requires a fundamental reflection on, we're talking about the ethical foundations, the fundamental reflection on the real foundations. Were the foundations of our nation as it is now, our democracy as it is now, really really ethical in a practical sense of the word? Did we really transform the state, the apartheid state, in the ways that we needed to get it to get the type of governance that we are talking about? And so I think it's important, as we consider that now the investigations are over, the reports, the commission's report, the State Capture Commission's reports have been submitted, is consequences. Will there really be consequences? Because even as late Emeritus Desmond Tutu said, part of his arguments that made him somewhat unpopular in a few years ago, when he talked about the 1% wealth tax, but he was talking about consequences for injustice. And the fact that if we don't have that, if we don't start incorporating a justice framework to our reconciliation and nation building, chances are that we are going to continue seeing the level of moral decay and chance taking, because there's absolutely no consequence. So the incentive for this type of behavior, unethical behavior, is really that people can get away with it and will get away with it. And so the fight back is based on that, because we have built a society and a government on the foundation of not taking responsibility. And if we look back historically at how it is that we started this new South Africa on the basis of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that really emphasized more truth and reconciliation than justice, we do need to then think about that question. Will there be consequences? Is there something that will prevent people from even thinking twice, if it's not their own moral compass and their own ethical grounding? Is there something else outside of that that can make people think twice about taking from the resources that really belong to the people of this nation? And I think barring that, it's going to be a very difficult path for us to tread in the next few years. And also, when going back to Professor Barra's contribution around whistleblowers, and we've got to also look at the state and capacity of the NPA and the justice system in and of itself, and its ability to deal with such complicated and complex cases, and whether or not there is enough support and capacity. Mandisa has raised this point as well about the amount of time it takes to train and bring capacity in the public service. So are we really realistic in our expectation about what such institutions can do about state capture? So I think those are some of the questions we really need to reflect on as we think about moving towards ethical foundations for a South African nation, as we move forward from this chapter of this publicly revealed state capture. Thank you.
Thank you, Nompumelelo, and thanks for that reminder again about the wealth tax, and also lack of remorse within corporate South Africa. Yes, we can say ANC and absolutely no consequences, but what about consequences there? Final input, Professor Musala, quickly on protection of whistleblowers. How can we guarantee that?
Okay, I sound well. I'm not sure about guaranteeing. I think what we need to do is to continue to strengthen all the efforts that are being made to expand the reach of the protection that can be made available, to bring in all whistleblowers. You know, there are many, many whistleblowers who are not protected at all. I mean, I receive a lot of letters and information from people from across the board, particularly in institutions. I mean, institutions like SAPS, for example. You can't believe the stuff that people are reporting from inside structures like that. So it's not just ordinary people; it's also people who are caught up in this sort of thing inside of organizations. My view is there are lots of tools. We've flagged all the tools, we've flagged all the themes, the issue of integrity, the issue of morality, the issue of professionalism. We've flagged all of them. What I would like to go back to at this stage, and I think we should continue to flag them, we should continue to create those. My response to Professor Nania was that social compact must not be this big, strong, wide thing that we want to try and recruit everybody into. I think we should decentralize it as much as we can. We should form social compacts in communities, in professions, in departments, in workspaces, in the labor sites where we are. That should be an instrument, but it should be something that people can come together and we will learn from one another as we move. But to wait for the president to bring us together within one national social compact, I'm not so certain. But let me leave that. The one particular thing I'd like to finish off with is to go back to the data issue. You see, what we've done is expose the breadth, depth, and if you like, the nature of the corruption that's murdering us, that's wounding us as a nation and as people. But can we recognize it when it comes in the future? How can we prevent it? We're talking about consequences, and certainly consequences it must be. And I do want to just throw in a word. I know a lot of people, the media has pumped the issue of why it is that people think that the NPA and the law enforcement agents will not do it. I think I'd like to argue for please, let's help them do it. And rather, even when we criticize them, let's criticize them not to be able to turn away from them and say, forget them, they won't do it. Let's not do it that way. Let's sit on them for them to do it, to get out there to do it. I know for a fact that a lot of activities taking place at the moment in the NPA, in the Hawks, this interaction between the Commission. Now that the Commission has finished the reporting phase of it, there's now interaction with getting information out to them, enabling them to no longer use the excuse that there is no capacity to investigate. The investigation has been done. What I do want to plead for is that we've got diagnostic tools that have been built up by the Commission and other people. What we now need are predictive models, and the data is more than you need. To now, that's why we have invited the research institutions of the state to start with, but the public's research institutions must avail themselves to access the data, to work on predictive. We need to be able to tell it from afar, as it is beginning to develop, before it is actually born. We need to be able to determine there it is, it's coming, and what can we do about it. So this is the time for creating powerful predictive models that will enable us to kill it in the bud. I'd like to stop there, if I may, please.
Thank you so much, Prof. And from one co-editor to another co-editor, fellow co-project leader, Dr. Iraj Abedian, if you'd like to pull it all together by way of your closing or concluding remarks in terms of this project stemming from the 2015 conference to the publication and today's webinar. Over to you, Iraj.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to be very brief. To first of all thank everybody for being here. That's very, very encouraging that we have like-minded people who can commit themselves to thinking about and consulting on this. To me, that's a very important. Also related thank you to Mistra for keeping this flame sort of flying and burning. It is very important, and hopefully in the next phase of it, we will have many more times experts, individual colleagues, and true comrades who would share our vision. The second point, without repeating anything, I would like to put a point on the table for everybody's consideration and reflection, especially in the light of what my colleague Professor Masala mentioned, that there is data beyond what we can imagine, and that's an important resource. But all of it for me means not only we should leave to NPA to do, but as a nation we need to engage in not just learning from this horrific nightmare that we've had so that we can recognize it from miles, but also put our heart and minds together for a campaign of getting what I call it reparation for the damages done, not just for the money stolen, but for the damages that are done to a country that was investment grade, that was on track to be a beacon of hope for the emerging economies and for our future children in particular, that now we've ended up here. It is not good enough to just recover a fraction of what's been stolen. And I firmly believe in the depths of my heart and soul that we need to mobilize our society to achieve two things. One is to reboot the ethical foundation of our democracy, but part of that rebooting is putting in place a global accountability for others as well as our fellow national citizens who have done the damage that they have done. Reparation is an absolute necessity if we want to create social justice, and also to make sure that accountability of the current and future political leaders and business leaders are put on the record of our democratic evolution. I hope my plea will be considered, and I'm very happy and excited to hear from all the colleagues as we move along this journey towards not just seeking, but hopefully establishing a new ethical foundation for our democratic dispensation. We owe it to our children, to our future generation. It comes to your point, Chair or MC, that we got to earn our right to be legitimate and respectful ancestors to our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those last words, Professor Abedian, becoming worthy ancestors. Thank you so much to the panel for today. If you can all switch on your cameras, but also the technical team that's been working behind the scenes, thanking the humanities, the Faculty of Humanity at Mistra, Dr. Heidi Brooks, Dr. Lawrence Karamba. We also have Sipokazi, who's also behind the Mapungupe, who's hosting today's event. If you don't mind, panelists and everyone, but most importantly, I'd like to thank the 40 participants who are still with us on this panel. And yeah, that brings us to the end of today's program. Thank you, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
that.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Prof, I